Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that is equal parts tension, danger, and let's be honest, a little bit of mischief you probably shouldn't be thinking about before bed. But that's exactly why we're here. Picture this, a battlefield at dusk, dust rising from a hard-fought skirmish, banners frayed, men weary and covered in sweat and grime, and in the midst of all this chaos, there's Lucian. Not just any warlord, oh no. He's the kind who commands respect, fear, and yes, sometimes a little bit of unwilling fascination, especially from those who think they have any control over their fates. Lucian strides into the remnants of his encampment like a thundercloud rolling over hills. His armor is battered, edges scratched from battle, and yet he moves with that effortless menace that makes everyone pause just long enough to reconsider their loyalty, or at least question whether they should be sneaking out of his sight. Men kneel, soldiers glance nervously at one another, and the wind seems to carry the faint scent of smoke and iron. He has just returned from leading a brutal raid across the valley, and his presence alone is enough to silence the camp. Inside a small, private tent, reserved for none other than the spoils of war and his personal intrigues, waits Lady Seraphine. A woman who, if you asked the generals, shouldn't command attention at all. But she does. She waits, seated gracefully upon furs, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a folded map, though she's clearly not thinking about troop movements. Her eyes lift only when Lucian enters, and just like that, the air thickens, charged with something that is equal parts anticipation and the sort of tension you can almost taste. Now, here's the part that makes historians roll their eyes and romance novel writers cheer. He doesn't storm in with a yell or a demand. No, he pauses, taking in the scene, her poise, the subtle tilt of her chin, the slow, deliberate awareness in her gaze. He drops his gauntlets to the floor, the metallic clatter echoing through the tent like punctuation on the start of an unspoken conversation. Did I miss anything while I was away? He growls, voice low, teasing, dangerous. And she doesn't jump. She doesn't cower. She smiles ever so slightly, just enough to suggest she knows exactly what he's thinking, and that she's already 2 steps ahead. Lucian moves closer, and you can imagine it, right? The heat of his presence, the scent of leather, smoke, and exertion mingling with the faint perfume she wears. A delicate, intentional touch that hints she understands the power of influence, of presence, of subtle danger. She doesn't speak at first, letting the tension swell, letting him realize that dominance here isn't simply measured in swords or fear. Sometimes it's measured in the pauses, the glances, the almost imperceptible shift of weight that suggests control without claiming it outright. Shite. And then, with the kind of timing that is equal parts calculated and reckless, she speaks a soft, teasing murmur about positions in the camp, the loyalty of his men, little notes of caution that make him pause mid-step. Every word, carefully chosen, drips with intelligence and charm, and yes, just a touch of provocation. Lucian's brow furrows, his mind recalculating, his desire, both to conquer and to understand, pulling him closer to the tent's center, closer to her. So here we are, the night just beginning, the tent quiet except for the soft creak of leather and the low murmur of voices that are equal parts strategy and seduction. And this, my friends, is the setup. A warlord who thinks he controls everything, and a woman who knows better, who thrives in the delicate dance of danger, wit, and temptation. It's a story of control and surrender, but not the kind you see in histories that forget the humans in their battles. This is intimate, this is tense, this is hot. Not in a way that historians approve, but in the way that makes you lean in just a little closer because the next move could change everything. Alright, so now that Lucian is standing there, a living storm in a tent lined with furs and flickering candlelight, let's settle in. You've got to imagine it. Outside, the camp is alive with the dull roar of post-battle recovery, men tending to wounds, guards shifting uneasily, the occasional shout over spilled wine or a mismanaged fire. But inside is a different battlefield altogether. And yes, it's exactly the kind of battlefield that historians never write about, probably because they'd blush, and yet it is entirely human. Lady Seraphine doesn't move to meet him immediately. She lets him circle, measuring, calculating, trying to read the subtle cues in her posture. And here's the key, she doesn't just sit there like a passive prize. Oh no. She leans in slightly when he stops near the table, tracing a finger across a goblet as if testing the temperature of the wine and of him. She's playing a game that is equal parts daring and calculated, and Lucien, for all his war-worn instincts, finds himself caught in it. He leans closer, just enough that she can feel the heat radiating off his armor, while the faint scent of smoke, sweat, and leather wrapping around her like a second skin. Her heart beats a little faster, not with fear, not exactly, but with the thrill of knowing the power she wields simply by remaining calm. She says nothing, letting the silence speak, letting him imagine the possibilities, while he should be strategizing about tomorrow's raids. Because that's the fun of it. She's the general of this little nocturnal campaign, and he hasn't realized yet. Cut. Then comes the first verbal thrust. "You've got sharp eyes," Lucien says. Voice low and deliberate. Dangerous. Watching too closely can be problematic. He grins, teeth catching candlelight, and she responds, softly, almost teasingly. And missing anything can be far worse. That one line, carefully delivered, does two things. It reminds him that she's not afraid, and it hints, just hints, that she knows the game, knows the rules, and knows exactly how to push him without giving herself away. The subtle tension builds as he sits, close but not too close, the flicker of the candles casting long shadows across his face. And here's where it gets deliciously dangerous. She leans in slightly, enough to brush her fingers against the edge of his gauntlet, a light touch that sets him on edge without actually touching him. You know that feeling, right? That brush that isn't a touch but feels like it could be everything? That's exactly what's happening here. Lucien knows he should pull back, should focus on the men, the camp, the politics. But he can't. Not tonight. They talk in measured words, a dance of strategy and veiled intent. She drops hints about dissent in the camp, whispers about guards whose loyalty might be bought. Sure. Fought. And yet every sentence carries double meaning. Ooh, it's a dangerous play. One wrong word, one slip, and she could be punished. And yet the thrill of control, the intoxicating power of influencing a warlord who thinks he controls the world, keeps her steady. And he, for all his experience, can't tell if he's being manipulated or if he's willingly walking into her trap. By the time the night deepens, the tent feels like an entirely different realm. Outside, the men sleep, dreaming of victories and failures. Inside, two minds engage in a subtle war, each move electric, each glance charged with unsaid promises and threats. And somewhere in the back of Lucien's mind, the realization hits. This isn't just a captive. This isn't just a woman who survived a raid. She's a force, a temptress who has managed in one evening to capture his attention, test his patience, and draw him into a game that he can't stop playing. As the hours pass, the candlelight flickers over the furred bed, over the polished edges of the table, and over the subtle curve of a smile that is both challenge and invitation. And Seraphine? She sits back slightly, letting him wonder, letting him reach for understanding, all while carefully keeping the upper hand. Every war has its casualties, and tonight, the first casualty is Lucien's certainty that he is the only one in control. All right, so we pick up where we left off. The candlelight flickers across the furs and wooden table, and the tent feels smaller than it is, the Cisus Grace. Like the entire world has shrunk down to just these two people, and the unspoken tension curling between them. Lucien, warlord, conqueror of cities, breaker of men's spirits, suddenly finds himself cautious, hesitant even, around a single woman. Funny how that happens, right? All those battle plans, all that iron discipline, and one carefully placed look can unravel it all. Seraphine leans forward just enough to brush a finger against the rim of his wine cup, and the touch is electric, not because it's bold, but because it's perfectly measured. She's daring him, and he knows it. You can almost hear the gears in his mind grinding, strategy, desire, suspicion. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. And that's exactly the point. Every word she speaks is a veiled arrow, every laugh a soft shield, every glance a calculated maneuver. She isn't a prize. She's a player, and in this little nocturnal battlefield, she has the advantage. Lucien clears his throat, tries to refocus. You speak as though you know everything that happens in this camp, he says, trying to regain some of his usual commanding tone. But the way he leans back, hands resting on the table, shows he's already intrigued, caught in her orbit. Seraphine tilts her head, letting the candlelight catch in her hair, eyes sparkling with mischief. I know enough, she says, voice low, almost purring, to keep you awake at night, don't I? That line, innocuous as it may sound, drips with challenge. And Lucien, who is used to commanding obedience, finds himself unnerved, anticipating her next move rather than directing it. Outside, the camp is quiet. The soldiers and guards are tired, the fire's burning low, and for once, the usual chaos of a warlord's domain has taken a backseat. Inside, however, the game intensifies. Seraphine rises slowly, stepping toward the window flap as if to check the guards, her movements deliberate, smooth, almost cat-like. Lucien watches every step, chest tight, pulse quickening, not because she's a threat in the usual sense, but because she's rewritten the rules entirely. The air between them is thick, a mix of danger and desire, and for all his experience, he feels exposed in ways that no battlefield has ever managed. She turns back to him, a soft smile playing on her lips, and it's a smile that is equal parts invitation and warning. Some men in your camp think they can take what they want, she murmurs, voice silk over steel. Others, she pauses, letting her eyes meet his, think they can control me. Lucien shifts slightly in his chair, caught off guard. The subtle power in her words isn't lost on him. She's not just surviving, she's asserting, testing, and teaching him all at once. And it's intoxicating because he can't tell if he should be angry, fascinated, or both. Then she moves closer slowly, brushing against the edge of the table as if accidental. Deliberate, flirtatious, maybe all three at once. Lucien notices how the candlelight dances across her skin, how the shadows emphasize her curves, how the scent of smoke and perfume mixes in a heady way that is entirely distracting. And for the first time in what feels like forever, he's acutely aware that there are battles that cannot be won with swords. Battles of control, of wits, of subtle seduction, and he is squarely in the middle of one he didn't expect. Hours pass in a quiet, simmering tension. Words are sparse but loaded, each glance and gesture weighted with meaning. Seraphine doesn't rush, doesn't falter. She holds her ground, teasing him with subtle gestures. A hand brushing over a sleeve, a soft laugh, a tilt of the head. Lucien, accustomed to dominance, realizes slowly that she is teaching him patience, restraint, and anticipation, all under the guise of obedience. He wants to command, to possess, to control, but the more he tries, the more he discovers he's willingly following her rhythm. By the time the night stretches toward its deepest hours, both are aware of the unspoken game. One false move and danger, humiliation, or worse awaits. And yet, the thrill of it, the heat, the tension, the intoxicating edge, keeps them engaged. The night isn't just about desire. It's about strategy, power, and the subtle conquest of minds as much as bodies. Seraphine has proven, in a few short hours, that she is no ordinary captive. She is the general of this intimate battlefield, and Lucien, for all his victories on the open field, is a willing soldier, in her private war. So here we are. The night stretches on thick and heavy, the fires outside the tent casting long, jittery shadows that dance across the canvas walls. Lucien paces slowly, boots crunching softly on the packed earth, every sense tuned to the quiet inside. Because he knows the real danger, the one he can't simply crush with a sword, is waiting in plain sight. Seraphine is there, seated on the furs. Faven posture floors, her posture flawless. The way she tilts her head just enough to watch him move, betraying both amusement and strategy. She's not tense near servers. No, she's not tense, not nervous. No, she's calm, deliberate, fully aware that she's running this show. And Lucien, for all his power and battlefield experience, is acutely aware that he's being studied. Tintin, do you ever sleep, Tyrell? Do you ever sleep, he asks, voice low, trying to reclaim some of his usual authority. Of course, he doesn't really expect an answer. He already knows the truth. She sleeps when it suits her, awakens when the timing is right, and in the meantime, she observes, calculates, and manipulates, all with the grace of someone born to command without ever drawing a blade. Seraphine finally meets his gaze, those sharp, intelligent eyes catching the flicker of candlelight. Sleep is overrated, she murmurs, voice soft, but the words carry weight. Challenge, tease, and warning all at once. The night moves slowly, deliberately. Every sound outside, every rustle of guards, every shift in the wind feels amplified. But inside the tent, the tension is intimate, consuming. Lucien finds himself drawn to her not just by desire, which is undeniable, but by fascination. She is a puzzle he cannot simply solve with intimidation, with anger, with dominance. And that, of course, drives him wild. There is heat here, yes, the kind that tightens your chest and quickens your pulse. But it's complicated, layered, strategic. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every subtle movement is a calculated move on Seraphine's part. At one point, she rises slowly, a shadow of movement across the low-lit furs, and stretches slightly, the soft fabric of her garments rustling. Lucien notices the way the light caresses her form, and for a fraction of a second, he's reminded why men have historically lost entire battles over women like her. Brilliant, elusive, untouchable. She doesn't approach him aggressively, doesn't lean in as if to seduce outright. Instead, she allows him to notice, to imagine, to be caught in the magnetic pull of her controlled presence. Tell me something, Lucien says finally, stopping mid-step, voice rough, eyes tracing her every motion. Why are you here? A simple question, but loaded, because he knows her mind isn't given away easily. She smiles, a small, sly curve of her lips, a smile that both answers and withholds. I'm here because I can be, she replies softly, letting her words hang between them like a delicate trap. The subtle defiance, the quiet assertion of power, is maddening, and he knows it. He can't command her like a soldier, can't intimidate her like a peasant, can't seduce her like a naive girl. She's on a level all her own, and he's never faced anything like this. Outside, the camp remains relatively quiet. The men, tired from days of marching, skirmishing, and guarding, unaware that the real intrigue is happening in this small, candlelit tent. Every so often, a faint clink of armor or muffled laugh reminds them of the world beyond. But Lucien and Seraphine exist in a bubble of anticipation, of strategic seduction, of a war fought in whispers and glances, rather than swords and shields. He can feel his usual certainty, his normal control slipping, replaced by a delicious tension, one that tightens and tempts and teases. Hours pass with no overt moves, no reckless gestures, just the slow, deliberate dance of power and desire. Seraphine leans back against the furs, eyes half-lidded, giving nothing away but revealing everything. Lucien, standing over her, feels the strange paradox. He is both the predator and the prey. He wants to close the distance, to take control, but she has already won control over the rhythm, over the pace, over the stakes. Every second that passes, he realizes she's reinforcing her dominance in subtle, quiet ways. A tilt of the head, a soft laugh, a flicker of eyelash over gaze. By the time the first hints of dawn streak faintly through the canvas, the night has been a masterclass in restrained strategy and tension. No one has made a move, yet, but the psychological battlefield has been won, hands down, by the woman in the furs. Lucien, warlord and conqueror of cities, leaves the tent with an unfamiliar ache in his chest. Respect, desire, curiosity, and yes, a measure of fear. Seraphine remains seated, calm, composed, every inch the strategist and temptress she was the night before. She has stolen more than his attention. She has stolen the terms of engagement itself. Morning breaks slowly over the camp, light filtering weakly through tents and banners that flap lazily in the wind. Outside, the soldiers move with routine precision, some dragging water, others checking weapons, a few half asleep and muttering about the night's chill. But the energy is subtly off. There's an undercurrent, a hum that only the observant notice, the quiet shift of power that happened while they slept. Lucien is gone for now, inspecting the outposts, leaving the camp in what he assumes is temporary order. But inside the tent, Seraphine stirs on the furs, her movements graceful, deliberate, like a cat stretching in golden sunlight, calculating the next steps in a game that everyone thinks is theirs to play. Her presence has already started rippling outward. Guards glance her way with curiosity. Officers murmur when she passes, and whispers float across the camp. Who is she really? A captive? A spy? A temptress? The uncertainty is intoxicating and, of course, precisely the point. She knows that influence is built not only through direct action, but by letting others wonder what they cannot control. One young lieutenant, overconfident and already tempted, dares to linger as she walks past, bowing just slightly too long. Seraphine's eyes meet his, sharp, unyielding, and he immediately understands that he has been measured and found lacking. A bead of sweat appears on his brow, and she glances away, letting the silent judgment linger like a blade. Think? Meanwhile, Lucien's absence allows subtle tests of loyalty to play out. Some soldiers begin to take liberties, small, seemingly harmless, a whispered joke here, a too long look there. But Seraphine notices everything. She doesn't act immediately, not overtly, but the tension she radiates is enough to make them second-guess themselves. When she speaks, softly, to a servant bringing her water, her voice is honeyed and smooth. Tell the general his men are ready, but remind them that order favors the careful. The words seem innocuous, almost polite, but the undertone carries weight. Those who overhear take note, recognizing that someone in the camp is quietly orchestrating the flow of information and attention. By midday, she is seated at the low table inside her tent, examining a map of the surrounding region, fingers tracing routes and potential weak points, while quietly observing the passing soldiers through the canvas flap. Every glance is purposeful, every posture calculated. She is fully aware that power in a camp is as much about perception as it is about swords, and she manipulates both with ease. Some men look at her with desire, some with envy, some with fear, but all are aware, if only subconsciously, that this woman has altered the hierarchy without lifting a weapon. The subtle psychological tension reaches its peak when the rival warlord, Merrick, approaches the tent under the guise of routine inspection. He leans casually, smirking, assuming that she will react with fear or flirtation, as most would. But Seraphine's gaze is unwavering. She measures him with the precision of a master strategist, letting him misinterpret her silence as intrigue while mentally cataloging his weaknesses. She allows him to lean closer, to underestimate her entirely, and all the while, she is mentally planning how to turn his arrogance to her advantage. By the time he leaves, Marek is distracted, slightly off balance, and she has secured her subtle hold over another piece of the camp's delicate political chessboard. As evening falls, the firelight flickers against the tent walls, casting shadows that seem to exaggerate every movement. Seraphine sits on the furs again, sipping wine with the calm, deliberate grace that has become her signature. Outside, the men whisper, laugh nervously, and adjust to the unspoken hierarchy she has established. Lucien returns later expecting obedience and loyalty, and instead finds the subtle chaos of influence already in motion. He notices it immediately, feels it in the shift of glances and the tension in the air, and, as always, it both frustrates and fascinates him. The Warlord may command armies, but in this quiet, intimate battlefield, Seraphine has been undefeated. Her power felt but rarely seen, her influence like a slow-burning flame that no one can quite touch. Ally? The day ends with anticipation hanging thickly over the camp. Soldiers are weary, officers alert, and Lucien's attention is constantly pulled between strategy and the woman who has made his nights, and now his days, unpredictable. Seraphine reclines on the furs, eyes glinting as she observes the subtle chaos she's orchestrated. The power she wields is intoxicating, delicious, and perfectly dangerous, and she knows that the real tests, temptation, loyalty, control, are still to come. Night descends on the camp like a velvet cloak, muffling distant sounds of the guards' patrols and the low murmurs of soldiers settling in for restless sleep. Candles flicker in the tents, casting shadows that dance across the canvas walls, exaggerating movements and lending an almost theatrical quality to the ordinary. Seraphine remains awake, reclining on the furs, the faint scent of wine and smoke mingling around her. Her sharp eyes follow every flicker of movement outside, every silhouette of men passing by her tent. She knows the rival warlord, Merrick, is restless tonight. His ambition has been quietly provoked, and she has made sure of it. Earlier in the evening, Merrick had come close again, pretending to discuss routine patrols and supply lines. But it was obvious, even to him, that the true conversation was unspoken. Seraphine had tilted her head, smiled faintly, and allowed just enough curiosity and amusement to seep into her expression. He misread her. Oh, he misread her entirely. Every subtle gesture, every careful inflection of her voice had been a calculated lure, and Marek, full of overconfidence and underestimating her, had taken the bait. Now he is pacing just outside the tent flap, the moonlight catching in his eyes and highlighting the arrogance that will soon be his downfall. Seraphine doesn't rush. She lets the tension build like a drawn bowstring. Each movement he makes, each muttered word about Lucien or the supposed weakness of the camp, feeds her assessment. She knows exactly what he desires, exactly how far he will go before. Pride blinds him completely, and she plans to use it. Lucien, returning late from the northern outposts, is unaware of the psychological warfare unfolding in his own camp. He believes in strategy measured by sword, shield, and supply. He hasn't yet realized that the quiet war around him is just as decisive. Seraphine, aware of his absence and his predictable patterns, has prepared for this moment. When Merrick finally steps too close, perhaps even reaching toward the tent, she lets her hand brush the furs casually, letting him misinterpret the gesture as consent, misjudging entirely her calm composure. His arrogance swells, making him reckless. Then, subtle but precise, she allows him to hear a whispered word, carefully pitched to imply she might entertain his ambitions if he acts daringly. The whisper is enough to unbalance him, to plant doubt in his mind about Lucien's command, about loyalty, about opportunity. Merrick steps back, momentarily enchanted, momentarily furious, entirely unaware that he is dancing to her rhythm. Each subtle movement Seraphine makes is designed to draw him in, to test him, and to ensure that the next step he takes will tighten her hold over the unfolding night. Inside the tent, Seraphine sips wine with languid elegance, allowing the tension outside to heighten her control. She doesn't rush to act, doesn't break the spell too soon. Every second Merrick lingers, every hesitant pause, every misinterpreted look is another advantage. Her power is not physical, it is psychological, a slow burn that no blade or troop can counter. By the time Lucien eventually returns, he will find Merrick off balance, distracted, and she will have positioned herself not merely as a captive, but as the central force in the camp's hidden hierarchy. Outside, the soldiers notice subtle shifts. The way Merrick paces a little too quickly, the way his confident glances falter. They don't yet understand why, but the tension is palpable. Seraphine's influence spreads quietly, like a shadow over the camp, subtle yet undeniable. And all the while, she remains calm, composed, tantalizingly untouchable, observing the consequences of her manipulation with faint amusement. By the end of the night, Marek makes a misstep, a minor but telling error, a careless word, a glance that betrays his impatience, and Seraphine files it away, committing every detail to memory. She knows that the next day she can leverage this slip, sow further discord, and tighten her control over both Merrick and Lucien without ever appearing to act overtly. Her advantage grows in silence, in patience, in the slow dance of power she alone understands. As the camp finally succumbs to sleep, the air thick with unspoken tension and desire, Seraphine reclines fully on the furs, letting the wine and satisfaction settle. She has played the night perfectly, and every glance, every whispered suggestion, has positioned her as both the desire and the danger in the camp. Power, she knows, is intoxicating, but control, subtle and unseen, is far sweeter. And she smiles faintly, knowing the next moves will be even more decisive. The temptations and threats of the day ready to bend further to her will.